Welcome to this explainer. I want you to strap in because today we are plunging headfirst into the massive, high-speed economic landscape of 2026. The world's financial engine is running incredibly hot right now. The gears are shifting faster than most people can even track, and we're literally witnessing the construction of two completely separate, monumental financial fortresses. It's a massive structural shakeup, and it's redefining exactly how the entire world does business, trades commodities, and basically stores wealth.
Now, if you feel like your paycheck is a melting ice cube right now, I want to assure you, you are absolutely not alone. We're living in a boiling global economy. The pressure is rising, things are spilling over, and those foundational old-school rules of money that govern the last 50 years, yeah, they're simply being tossed out the window. We are in a brand new era, and understanding the architecture of this new era is really the only way to protect your purchasing power. Okay, let's dive into this. Here is what we're looking at today. First, we'll define the Great Realignment. Then, we'll examine U.S. swap diplomacy right into the BRICS bridge. After that, we'll break down America's domestic shield, analyze the massive global tug-of-war between inflation and deflation, and wrap the whole thing up with the new asset paradigm. So, Part 1. The Great Realignment, or the boiling global economy. What we are experiencing globally right now is not your normal cyclical market turbulence. It's not just a temporary blip on the radar. It is a fundamental restructuring of the global economy, where the old rules of money are being replaced by two competing financial systems. This realignment is the ultimate forcing function. It's requiring every single sovereign nation on Earth to look at the board and consciously choose exactly how they want to build and integrate their financial architecture. It's a tale of two fortresses, and the blueprint for the first one is currently being drawn up in Washington.
Which brings us to Part 2, U.S. swap diplomacy, also known as the Steel Blue Strategy.
Under Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, the United States has adopted this remarkably radical, highly proactive new approach, swap diplomacy. Basically, this involves using the U.S. Treasury's Exchange Stabilization Fund to hand out permanent dollar swap lines to allied nations. Historically, managing international dollar liquidity was pretty much the Federal Reserve's headache. But now, the Treasury is stepping right into the ring, using its own multi-billion-dollar war chest. They're going directly to nations like the UAE, Argentina, and South Korea and plugging them straight into the U.S. Treasury switchboard.
And this brilliantly illustrates the core defensive strategy here. Think of it as handing out a premium membership to the U.S. dollar. Why do this? Well, because in times of crisis, foreign nations panic. They desperately need U.S. dollars to pay their debts. So what do? They start dumping their U.S. Treasury bonds on the open market, which effectively crashes the bond market. Swap diplomacy tells these allies, hey, don't panic sell your U.S. bonds. If you need cash, we'll just swap your local currency for ours directly. It keeps the allies loyal, and crucially, it keeps the bond market completely stable.
Moving on to Part 3, the BRICS Parallel Universe, the Deep Red and Gold System.
Now, the East is obviously not just sitting back. China, Russia, and their partners are busy constructing an entirely separate ecosystem built from the ground up to bypass Western financial choke points. The absolute cornerstone of this new architecture is the BRICS bridge. This is an unsanctionable, digital parallel payment system built specifically to settle trades completely outside of the US dollar network. And this is a really crucial distinction. They aren't necessarily trying to overnight destroy the US dollar globally. Instead, their strategy is simply to make the dollar irrelevant in their own neighborhood. So when they trade massive commodities like oil barrels and grain sacks, they're doing it across a digital bridge where the dollar sign doesn't even exist.
99%. Let that number sink in for a second. That is the staggering percentage of trade between China and Russia that is now settled entirely in yuan and rubles. 99%. I mean, just a few years ago, that number was a mere fraction of what it is today. It shows you exactly how fast this parallel universe is scaling up, and it proves that a massive cross-border economy can function without ever touching the Western banking system.
Let's move to and see how this builds into Part 4, America's Domestic Shield, the Defense Production Act.
So, with a competing parallel system rising in the East, the United States is aggressively pivoting its focus inward. The domestic strategy under President Trump represents a massive shift in industrial policy, what we're calling a domestic shield offensive. They're invoking the Defense Production Act, but here is the fascinating part. They aren't using it for a foreign military conflict. They are using it for a domestic energy war. That means rapid-fire pipeline construction to maximize energy output and physically fortifying the electrical grid. And perhaps most notably, it involves building a strategic asset reserve that officially incorporates both gold and Bitcoin into the nation's strategy. The ultimate goal of all these domestic policies? Creating a hard anchor for the dollar. For decades, fiat currencies around the world have just been drifting, backed mostly by faith and credit. By combining massive, undeniable domestic energy output with finite, hard assets like gold and Bitcoin in a strategic reserve, the government's aim is to physically anchor the currency. They want to give it a tangible, impenetrable floor in the midst of this global realignment.
Which leads us right into Part 5, Inflation versus Deflation, the global tug-of-war.
So, what does this all mean? What is the macroeconomic fallout of these two massive fortresses clashing? Well, the result is two intense, opposing economic pressures fighting it out on the global stage. On one side, you have Western structural inflation. Bringing manufacturing home and rebuilding supply chains domestically is incredibly expensive, and that creates structural, sticky, high prices. On the opposing side, you have Eastern deflation. China is currently facing the exact opposite problem. They have an absolutely massive supply of manufactured goods, but not enough domestic buyers to actually consume it, which drives prices down in their ecosystem. Every nation on Earth is currently stuck right in the middle of this tug-of-war, desperately trying to grow their economies fast enough to outpace their national debt before high interest rates just swallow them whole.
And finally, Part 6, the new asset paradigm, surviving the shift.
So the crucial point is, what does all this high-level geopolitical plumbing actually mean for your own portfolio? How do you survive and thrive during this shift? Well, the takeaway is this. Cash is no longer a savings account. It's a utility. In an era of structural inflation and competing financial fortresses, simply holding paper money in a traditional bank account is a losing strategy, period. Cash is a tool you use to pay your immediate bills and facilitate transactions. It's a utility. It is no longer a safe place to store your long-term economic energy.
Instead, we really have to look to the new safe havens. The winners of this great realignment won't be the people hoarding the most paper currency. No way. The winners will be the ones who hold assets that inflation absolutely cannot touch. That means hard assets like gold, it means digital assets like Bitcoin, and crucially, it means investing in critical skills, building real career capital in sectors like energy, artificial intelligence, and infrastructure. These are the fundamental building blocks of the new economy, and possessing them is what makes you indispensable.
We have covered some incredible ground today, from the digital bridges of the East to the domestic shields of the West. The global pot is boiling, and for the first time in 50 years, the fundamental recipe of money has permanently changed. So you have to ask yourself, are you anchored for what comes next? Or are you just holding on to a melting ice cube? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and stay ahead of the shift.